over the course of your career, you will always find stages where you feel like you're stuck. I think the best thing for cinematographers of any level is to talk to other cinematographers. But as far as what it means to you in the bigger picture and where you're headed or what you're meant to be doing, I don't think you ever figure it out. And then you realize that the next thing is just around the corner. You may not see it then, but the door will open. My name is Jeremy Benning. I'm a cinematographer and I shoot episodic television, feature films, and commercials. My career path started with being in the electrical department. I worked as a spark, kind of as a PA swing, but I saw early on, kind of coming out of art school and being interested in photography, I knew I wanted to get into cinematography. And from talking with people in the industry at the time and some early sort of mentor advice that I got was, if you really want to get into cinematography, you should get into lighting. So I knew at the time that I had the choice of going in the union path and kind of getting into the trainee program, and this would have been in the early 90s. And I realized at the time that it probably made sense to get into lighting because that's what I was really interested in. So I started working at a music video company in Toronto, and I was kind of like a PA. I was still in film school. I was going to class during the day, and then on weekends and days that I had free, I was taking music video jobs, basically working as a PA in a swing. And swing being like, between the two grip and lighting departments. So for me, that was great because I was getting to witness everything on set and how things were lit. And of course, it was music videos at the time. So every day was something totally different. Around that same time, I was interested in Steadicam. I'd seen it as a kid watching behind the scenes film, making ofs, and it ended up becoming sort of the main thing I did for quite a while. In fact, people just sort of knew me as a Steadicam operator, even though I was really interested in being a cinematographer. But I thought, well, Steadicam is a good thing to learn as a tool to use as a cinematographer. And it actually became, for a while, the thing I was known for the most. And eventually, after doing that for a number of years, I realized I had to make a choice of, am I going to continue being a Steadicam operator and both, or do I stop it entirely? Because I started to realize that people were only thinking of me as that because I got good at it, just because I was doing it a lot, and it wasn't something it wasn't an ambition to become that, but I just became very good at Steadicam. So people knew me as that, and I started hearing that people weren't necessarily thinking of me as a DP as much anymore. So I had to make that hard decision of like, I have to decide if I'm going to do this anymore. And it was a good job. I mean, it pays well, and I was enjoying it. I loved doing it. So it was a bit of a bittersweet thing to say, I don't know, I might have to step away from this, but I did. This is going back to over like 12 years ago, I stopped doing it. I think everyone at some point in their career will get stuck being known for a certain thing, no matter what genre you work in. You might be known for doing comedies or fantasy films or whatever it is. And for me, I had never done science fiction before until I did The Expanse. And I went into that as someone who had no background in it. And, now that the show is over, that ended like a 7-year chapter of my life and my career, which is an amazing thing to think about. But also, there's a weird thing where people now think of me as a sci-fi DP, even though before that I'd never done it. So it's kind of funny how you can end up falling into a particular part of the industry, having never done it before, and then suddenly you do it enough, and now people think that's all you do, even though you had never done it before. So I think for me, I found I had to make a conscious decision to always find things that were different between seasons of the show, and to make sure that I kept flexing my muscles outside of that world, because it's a certain specific look. The show has a certain kind of there's rules to it that you have to kind of maintain because of just the nature of the kind of environments that you're in. So it's important for me. I found it was important to break out of those to not be known as just that guy. In the commercial world, it's interesting how, because I have a bunch of experience in that world. Now, I haven't done it in a while because I've been in long format for so long, but I do find that, in the terms of the commercial advertising agency world, they don't really look at your work outside of just the commercial world necessarily. Like if you have a lot of great narrative credits, they don't necessarily look at that. They want to see what kind of brands you've worked with. Can you shoot a car? Have you shot food? That kind of thing. And there was a period of time, many years ago when I was more in the commercial world, and I thought, I knew some other DP friends of mine that had tried to do more food work and more tabletop work, and they actually went and basically made their own tabletop food reels to show that they could do it. Because if you didn't have that one bit of food on your reel, an ad agency might look at your reel and say, well, that person hasn't shot a hamburger, or they haven't shot this. It doesn't matter what else you've got on your reel, but if that commercial, if the button at the end of that commercial is a food shot or a pack shot, whatever, if you don't have that on your reel, you may not get the job. And that was something I learned early on, because I didn't really understand that. I didn't realize that. But from the other DPs who were sort of mentors to me, I realized that they had struggled with that. And I thought, well, okay, well, I guess I need to make a food reel, because I didn't have any food on my reel. And so I did. I went and got a bunch of magazines and did a bunch of tear sheets of all the different kinds of food shots that I thought looked great. And I thought, I'm going to try and replicate as much of the stuff that I like in these tear sheets. And that's what I did. I made my own little food reel. And it actually turned into, I started getting food work and tabletop work because I had done this. I knew I could do it, but I just didn't have it on my reel. And I know people have done the same thing with car work and that kind of thing, because cars are very specific, and I have never really done cars. It's not a thing that's on my reel. It's not something I've ever really done, but I know people who've done the same thing, where they've gone and made their own kind of spec spot car reels in order to get car work. I think spec work is actually really important to broaden your reel. If you feel like there's something that you want to focus on that you're not getting, or you want to try and get more into that world, I think it is worth the effort and time and often money that it takes to make a spec spot. And it's often a good opportunity to collaborate with another director or other people, your peers, that are interested in doing the same thing. It's actually it's a team effort. You can all pull together and make something interesting out of it. And also, not just spec spots, but passion projects. Any kind of passion project. Ad agency people or whoever, or other producers will look at your reel and sometimes be like, oh, I really thought that dance film you did was really cool. And it may be the thing that was, completely the passion project, no money, freebie, that sometimes, well, it shows. There's a passion and an energy in it that attracts people to your reel, and they'll see that as like, oh wow, that's a great piece. And I think it's important to always do those things, not just to feed yourself, but people actually look for that kind of thing. They see it in your work. It's interesting. I think earlier in my career, I would reach out more to people, and it's funny, and this goes back to the music video days. I got a piece of advice from one of my mentors who said, if you want to work with people, you have to go and drink with them. And I was never really a bar hopping socialite in that sense, but I realized early on that, well, you kind of have to maybe go to the places where these people hang out and go have a drink with them and go socialize. And it's not even about a job or anything. It's just to go get to know them and just get to know them as people, because it is a people thing. And you want to it's kind of a two-way thing. You want to meet them on that kind of loose social setting where you realize that you like each other as maybe as friends. It could be more than just the collaborating, because sometimes you end up being friends with these people. So they want to see that you're the kind of person they want to spend 12 hours a day with, and you also want to see the same thing with them, that you want to spend a lot of time with this person, because they're going to become like family to you. So for me, I learned that early on, that I needed to kind of get out there and just sort of hang out and meet people and just be, I guess, social in that sense. Now it's, I find that if I see someone's work that I like, I'll reach out to them and say, I love what you've done, and sometimes that turns into something. Sometimes it's just literally mutual admiration, but sometimes that can turn into working together, because it's all about trying to find those people that you have some kind of common bond with, or some kind of, kinship creatively, and you look for that. And I think the more you go along in your career, you're always looking for the people that you align with creatively, because that makes the process of working more fun and more inspiring. It fills the creative well when you find people like that. In the early part of my career, I didn't really have a role model to look to who was openly gay as a cinematographer to give me that confidence to come out at the time when I was building my career. And because of that, I had the worry that somehow it could be used against me, that it was maybe a negative, that was something for a reason someone may not hire me. So I felt that it was better to not be out, because it could somehow affect my ability to get the next job. I was in situations at social gatherings or things outside of work, even at work occasionally, where things were said that were meant to be jokes, or even just passing comments that could be sort of seen as homophobic, or that person might be have issues with people who are gay. So now it's different because society is more conscious of those things and people are more sensitive to those kinds of things. I think in the past, especially when you're in an environment where people may think that you're straight and they think that there's not someone gay in the surroundings, that they might say things that they wouldn't otherwise say. And I think now, in my position of my career where I am now, it's actually important for me to be vocal about that, so that if there are people in the younger generation, next generation, who maybe are in that position, that they know that someone else has been able to get past that and come before them, where it didn't matter. Their career wasn't impacted by who they were. I think I've learned to really be confident in myself, who I am as a person in totality, that I don't really care what other people think in that sense. I've learned to not care. I mean, I obviously want to care about what people think professionally to collaborate, but as far as people thinking about who I am personally, I try not to let that affect me, because I'm here to do a job. I'm here to collaborate and be an artist, and I don't want that part of me to blend into it. I'm confident in who I am, and I don't hide it anymore, but I'm not going to use it to worry about what people think about me. I think if I had come out sooner, that the outcome wouldn't have been as negative that I thought it might be, that I maybe was overthinking it, and that I think that part of it was because I didn't have someone to look to, that I just didn't have that courage to take that leap of faith. But I think if I had to look back and do it over again, that I probably waited too long. And I mean, you can't do those things over again, but if I had to, I would have done it sooner. And I think that's the message I have to others, is to, like, don't put yourself through that for so long, because it's not worth it, and I don't think it really matters anymore. I mean, cinematography is a lifelong pursuit. It's one of those things that you never stop learning, and the day that you feel like you've learned it all, then you've basically reached a burnout phase, or you've kind of lost your creative spirit. And I think that's the biggest fear for me is, you know, when you look at the long game and having done it for a long enough time, you start thinking, you know, how much do I have in the creative well to keep doing this? Because every project now, especially when you get into doing long form, you're committing to 5, 6, 7 months of something. And for me, I find there's that looking forward, okay, the next 10, 15 years of my career, now that I know that episodic television is sort of the main thing I'm going to be doing for the next little while, with maybe a feature here and there, it's how do you keep that creative well filled? I think, yeah, I don't think you ever figure it out. I think as long as you do this profession, you'll figure out techniques, you'll figure out strategies of working with people and your people skills and how to lead teams. Like, those are good things that you'll figure out. But as far as what it means to you in the bigger picture and where you're headed or what you're meant to be doing, I don't think you ever figure it out. I don't know what I want to be doing next. I often think to myself, well, after this next thing, especially after finishing a show that was such a huge part of our lives for like 7 years, then it's like, well, now what? I don't know what the next thing is, and I don't really know what I'm meant to be doing until it kind of shows up. So there's that, also living with the uncertainty of it, that you kind of have to embrace the uncertainty of the industry and just be okay with that, because earlier on, that creates stress of, you know, where's the next thing, or what should I be doing? And I think I've realized now that you don't necessarily always know what the next thing is, and I've kind of gotten to the point of being okay with that, because I think if you focus on something and say, I want, you know, let's say for example, you want to do like action films or Marvel movies or something, and you make that I think sometimes that can be, I don't know, the pursuit of that to me seems such an energy draw that in some ways it's better to let the things that are out there that flow to you to just happen, and you'll find them, they'll come to you. Over the course of your career, you will always find stages where you feel like you're stuck, because I think it's just a natural course of any kind of craft or art form that you do. And you read books about, you know, painters and sculptors and musicians, and every artist that does it for long enough eventually finds that happening to them. I think it's a common experience. And I think once you realize that it is a common experience, it's not as frightening when you find yourself in it. And I think over time I've realized that it's going to keep happening. You never get to a point in your career where you're not going to find it, you're stuck again. Even if you've done it for years and years and years, you're always going to find that. And I think it's partly to get unstuck is actively seeking projects that will challenge you and take you into places that take you out of your comfort zone. And that whole, the saying of like, do something that frightens you or scares you or whatever that saying is, I think that's important. And sometimes it may mean taking the project that is maybe less prestigious or less lucrative financially, or over the thing that is bigger and more money or more prestige or bigger brand or whatever that is. Sometimes it's actually to break out of that rut. You actually have to say no to those things sometimes and take the thing that's maybe the more indie project, or because you just really believe in it and there's something in there that you see as that just calls to me. And those are usually the things that break you out of that rut when you find those projects. We've talked about, therapists and therapy, and I think the best thing for cinematographers of any level is to talk to other cinematographers, because there is a lot of insecurity and self-doubt, imposter syndrome. At any stage of your career, you always have those feelings, because at some point another project will come along and you're like, can I do this? Am I the right person? Am I cut out for this? Do I have the creative energy in me to pull this off? I think that it's really great to talk to other cinematographers of any level, especially people that are in your peer group, because then you realize that we're all going through similar thought processes and struggles and whatever. And there's the good and the bad side of it is a common experience amongst all of us. And because we're so singular and what we do, we're always by ourselves, that you tend to kind of like, you're in your head and you're worrying about things. And then you realize when you talk to a friend, cinematographer friend in the business, you realize that we're all thinking the same things. Well, I mean, the old saying is luck and timing. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think there's talent as part of that. You have to have talent, but there is luck and timing. And the thing about luck and timing is that if you do it long enough, eventually you strike it, right? It's that saying of like, a broken clock is right twice a day or whatever. It's like in your career, if you pursue it, if you stick with it and you persevere, eventually those things happen. Those opportunities do happen. And when things may not go your way and a project doesn't happen, or you don't get it, or any of those kinds of things, it can be crushing. Like you sort of have that down in the dumps sort of feel from those experiences. But over time, you learn to develop a thicker skin to those things. And then you realize that the next thing is just around the corner. You may not see it then, but the door will open. And I've had that happen to me many times, where a project that you're ready to do falls apart for whatever reason, funding goes away, whatever, and you were all hyped up for it, and it was like you're mentally prepared, and I've even started prep on projects that have fallen apart like that. And then the next thing comes along that ends up being like one of the best things of your career that you've done up to that point that you never would have seen coming. So you have to always remind yourself that when you're in those kind of depressing or crushing situations creatively, that there is that next thing around the corner. I think it's important to feel comfortable with not knowing everything, and especially on a film set environment, when someone will come up to you, like an AD will come up and say, how long is this going to be, or what's the problem here, or how are we going to get out of this time challenge we have. Sometimes situations are so fluid that you may not have the answer in that exact moment, but that's also why you surround yourself with good people. You rely on those trustworthy collaborators on set, because you've been in that moment where something's not working, or something changes and you got to like find the shot in the next 20 minutes, and you turn to your gaffer, your operator, and say like, what do we think? Like, what can we do here? I need to make this happen, but I'm not sure how to get it. Like it's not a bad thing to say, I don't like ask for advice or turn to your key collaborators. And I think it's important to do that, to not have that feeling like you have to know all the answers. Because you'll learn tricks of your own as you go along, but eventually you do turn to someone, or you're in a moment where you're trying to make it happen, or it's just the circumstances of the shot have changed. And sometimes your gaffer or someone will come up and be like, hey, what do you think? Should we try this? And you're like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, do that. And it's that being open to those suggestions, and also not being afraid to like say, like, what should we do? I think because you're so in your own work a lot of the time, you tend to lose sight of the fact that there is something about what you do that's unique to what you do. And you have to have that confidence sometimes of knowing that I'm here for a reason. They asked me here because they like the specific thing that I've done. and have that confidence of knowing that there is a uniqueness to what you're doing that's inherent for all the things you've done in the past. Like you are a product of everything you've done up to that moment. Every little experience, every short film, every indie project, everything you've done is, you're at the pinnacle of that. You are the result of all those things. And I think, you have to always remember the fact that you are uniquely right for that moment of that project. And that's why you're there. Before I did Expanse, I hadn't really had any interest in narrative television, episodic television. I'd done Steadicam on it in the episodic world years before, but I wasn't part of the industry that I was pursuing as a DP. I just didn't have any interest in it. But then around that time, like House of Cards and Netflix and all these things were kind of becoming huge. And I remember thinking, oh, that's actually really the idea of telling a story over a long period of time where there's scope and production value and all that. That'd be pretty interesting. And then Expanse fell in my lap. They were looking for a certain person, a certain type of person. And I remember thinking, this is an amazing project, but there's no way they're going to hire me. Like, I don't have nearly the credits. But I went into the interview, and there were a lot of people. The production designer was there, and a couple of the American producers, and the director, Terry McDonough, who's from the UK. They were all in the room, and I think I spent an hour and a half there. And what was interesting from that was that Terry's background is that he had done documentary work early in his career, and I had done a lot of documentary work. And he knew from my reel that I'd done that, because there was some documentary work on my reel at that time as well. And I remember him saying, in the interview, he said, I really like the fact that you've got documentary work in your reel, and that's something that he thought would bring some sort of realism to a science fiction show where it may come off as being artificial, because so much of it is a set and visual effects and whatever. So he pushed for me in that sense. It was actually Terry that pushed, because the other producers were like, well, this guy has no television credits. But they kept saying to me, we want someone from outside the television role. We want someone who thinks outside the box. But we also see you have no credits. So it was kind of this weird contradiction of like, we're looking for someone like you, but how are you going to do this because you have no credits in television? And it's interesting because at that point, I realized that everything I'd done up to that point in my career were all the little things that made me the right person for that job. Like the fact that I did Steadicam, that I did documentary, that I had done indie film, like every little skill set that I picked up along the way was what actually made me the right fit for that job. I think if I had to give my younger self advice, I think it would be to not sweat the failures. And also to realize that sometimes we get so fixated on a shot or a setup where you're not happy with something and it's bothering you, and we got to go, and the actors are in the flow, you can't change something. At the end of the day, you have to step outside of the moment and think, no one's probably really going to notice the thing that you're stressing over, unless it's like, totally egregious, like there's a light in the shot. But if it's some subtlety of the light and it's like eating you up, that it's like, it's not what I wanted. It usually doesn't matter. It's if the performance is great and the rest of the scene around it and the project is constructed and sings as a whole, then those little small things, don't sweat those. And I think that's, if I had to go back and tell myself that, it's like, because all of the early stresses were those like fixating over the things that don't really matter. Yeah, you got to learn to let go. You learn to let go of like the little things, like know what's important. Know that, like, yes, you want to make it look great and tell the story and the visuals speak to the story, but you let the little stuff go because it's often doesn't matter.